Okay, so the topic today, I had an idea about 5 years ago of extrema sampling. That's kind of the core idea of like, you got, oh, what the, okay, hold on, I need to, how do I make it go into the like actual presentation mode?
I think it's the slideshow from the right.
Yeah. Hey, let's go. Okay, so extrema sampling, we're gonna get into what that means, but essentially data compression and time stretching, what do those even have to do with each other? That's a good question. So essentially, to maybe get you on the hook, if you're not like an audio guy, I just kind of want to be like, let's just demonstrate a little bit of what the actual product of this is. Essentially, time stretching, if you're not familiar, is that like with like say a record or a tape, when you go to change the speed, you also change the pitch. They're like inherently linked to one another. But we have this family of like digital algorithms that seeks to decouple those things. So basically, and we're all familiar with this in the form of like, say on YouTube, when you go to put it at 0.5x speed or 2x speed, it doesn't chipmunk the audio, it doesn't make it sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks. It just, it just plays faster. So that's time stretching. So that's at the core of what it is. So let me start with an example. And what better example than like a drum break? So we can change the speed of it. Actually, I'm going to turn. So we can change that, and we kind of have like control over the grain size and make them bigger. And that's kind of like longer looping repeats. And then we can also change the pitch. So sounds kind of freaky and weird. How about some like, that's like drum and bass. That's like the basis of all of it. And if you go with the really big grain sizes, you get the little looping repeats, and they're all kind of timed and synced. But how about we choose just like a full? Because there's also baked into this is the data compression, which actually hold on. Let's just show it with this. So essentially, I have this knob that controls the threshold. Let's speed it back up. We can just like kind of degrade the quality. I have to make this smaller. I'm sorry, that's really not the best example of it right there, actually. We're going to listen to Hall & Oates. And we can slow it down to like infinity. Change like the size of the grains, make them super small. It sounds really robotic and bad, but. And then I added this feature where you can kind of. Essentially, the sample is still playing in like real time underneath that. Which may be okay. I don't want to do too much demo before we talk about anything, but also let's just try that because we can get very ambient and atmospheric with it. So we'll listen to this Sade sample here. So if we slow it down, maybe pitch it down a little bit, go with a big grain size. Quality. I guess it sounds kind of bad on this one. So then you need the drum break, coming in on top of that. So essentially, that's the type of stuff that we're working with here. And so the data compression aspect of it is like it's become less involved, but it's what, as we'll get into, the sparseness is what makes the compression possible, or it's what makes the time stretch so cheap. And I guess just really quick, it's very efficient. That's kind of the main thing. There's definitely better sounding algorithms out there that are more complex. They use the Fourier transform, they use all this stuff. But this is occupying like 10% of the CPU on this microcontroller. And as we'll get into, you can do this all with just linear interpolation all the way through and use like 2%, and it still sounds like pretty good. So let's click forward. So here I am on Mount Hood and the Paradise Park, a beautiful, beautiful place to be. I am a, quote, self-employed electrical engineer, also known as unemployed. I'm an audio programmer. And so basically what got me through school, what got me my degree was I was learning like Ableton, getting into like the Volca samplers around that time and the Electron Digitact. So I just wanted to make beats. I wanted to make my cool lo-fi hip hop beats to chill and relax to. And I ended up learning, I was like, hey, wait, a filter, an oscillator, like this is the same stuff as that I'm learning in double E. So that's kind of how I got through. Also, I really love juggling. So if you juggle, let's hang out at the park, please, soon. So yeah, just kind of getting into like, where did this begin? Where did this idea spawn from? So I would say the reason I even have a YouTube channel is because I'm a big Electron Digitact fan, and this is a sampler that, you know, whoever's not familiar, it's essentially is an 8-track sampler. It's like a one-shot sampler. They kind of went for that like old school tracker style, like beat making all in one, like groove box kind of thing. And one thing that it really couldn't do, at least not with the firmware when I got it, was take a loop, it's like, okay, I have 4 bars of this song or a drum break, and like actually synchronize it to the BPM. And it was really annoying problem for me because I was like, here's my ideal like liquid drum and bass machine, and I can't be syncing drum breaks. Like this is pretty bad. So anyway, I figured out you can actually use the LFO as your method of synchronizing everything. And so that was like, I made this video, it got a pretty good reception because I was maybe not the first person to ever do it, but the first person to like mathematically lay down, like, here's exactly what we need to do, and here's how you can use this as a creative effect. And that kind of bolstered my confidence of like, oh, okay, I can actually do some cool stuff with audio. Around the same time, I was really getting into interpolation and delay lines because I wanted to make my own reverbs, I wanted to make my own audio effects. And so there were some open source platforms, and I was just writing C++, which I learned in school, learning delay lines, learning, interpolation, all of that. And then at the same time, I'm a big Blender enthusiast. So my Blender heads out there, big geometry nodes enthusiast. And in Blender and just in 3D animation in general, you have the concept of keyframing, which is like you draw these curves and you kind of just like, it's like a non-uniform grid where you're like, okay, this guy's arm should start over here, and then over here it should go up here, and you just have this like non-uniform grid you're defining. It's like how animation is done, pretty much, keyframing. And so now all of these ideas are kind of like floating around in my head of like, can we just like keyframe like audio? Like why do we have to have 44,000 samples a second? Like if you're listening to a bass note, why does it have to have 44,000 samples? Those are like a lot of waste, So essentially, so this is Blender keyframing. This is what it looks like. So essentially, the core idea, uniform sampling is wasteful because in the case of audio, the human voice, even in all its harmonics, unless you're just, a harsh noise enjoyer and you're just blasting harsh noise, you're probably not occupying 44,000 hertz or whatever it is the entire time, all the harmonics. Like my voice right now, it's like, I don't know, the fundamental's relatively low. There's some harmonics going off. There's gaps, there's silence. All that time, those are kind of just like wasted samples. So the core idea that I had was like the extrema of a signal define the signal. That's like the topology of your signal. Because you got all your ups and downs, all of your curves and everything, but really at the end of the day, if you have this point and you have this point, the samples in between, they don't necessarily matter that much because it's like the extrema define it. And so I just had this idea. I was like, could you get away with throwing away literally every other sample that's not an extrema? And as you just heard, the answer is yes. Like the fact that I'm getting intelligible audio out of that at all is kind of bizarre, and it took a long time to prove that. But this is the core idea. Essentially, get rid of every sample that's not an extrema. And you might think that you would need more, but in some cases for like DC signals, you kind of do, but it's not that bad. So anyway, the engine, I don't want to get like too mathy into the DSP stuff, which kind of is like what this is. But essentially, to detect the extrema, to find the extrema of the signal, you take the first derivative. And if that sounds scary, you essentially can do the super simple version of it, which is like you take your current sample and you subtract it from the previous sample. And that's your derivative. Of course, that's like kind of the naive way to do it. You have this, which I'm using in this engine, which is like basis splines, which is just like polynomial interpolation. A little more calculation, but still it's just like take the input signal, multiply it by itself a couple ways with some coefficients, and then you're good. And then once we've identified those extrema, we store them in like value index pairs, because now we're entering a weird space, the sparse domain, where in a normal buffer, your, tick by tick, you like the index that you're at in the buffer also tells you like the time, but now we're like disconnecting those two things, which makes it get a little bit weird. So instead of storing just one value, we store the value and then also the index in the original buffer that it was in. And all of the compression stuff, any of the numbers, because I wrote a paper on this, and all of the numbers in there, they account for this doubling of data. And even so, at like the highest quality level, you still get like on like a full mix of a song and audio, which is very dense with information, you still get like 2 to 3x compression. And it sounds, it sounds like a little crackly, a little maybe not perfect, but it has character. And then for reconstruction, because then now you have this thing of like, we still want to think about the sample in its normal, like original buffer. It still is like 5 seconds of audio. We want to think about it that way. So you have to do a little bit of domain mapping. Gets a little weird, but it's just literally just linear and reverse. It's reverse linear interpolation. And then for the reconstruction, you could use just straight up linear interpolation, but for better aliasing performance, use non-uniform splines, basically cubic Hermite splines, if you're familiar. Anyway, that's the mathiness of it. The hardware in this case, so both of these modules that I have here, the one we were just listening to and the one that I'll demo at the end, both based on the Electrosmith Daisy, which if you want to get into like audio programming, to me is like one of the best ones in that it's like very well documented. You can go as low level with it as you want. You're manipulating buffers, you're doing all this stuff. You can write C++, you can write pure data, all this stuff. Great platform. This actual module here is one of my friends up in Seattle. He's launching his modular company, and he has like a multi-firmware platform. And so essentially that's what this module is. He's like, hey, you want to make a firmware with this, this time stretch algorithm. So, and it's also based on Daisy. And then eventually, my grand scheme of things, should I make my own DAW or like loop station? I always want like a looper. And I feel like none of the loopers that are out there really work the way that I would want. Maybe I'll get to that. Hopefully I'll get a job and some income before that. I need income soon. Okay, here we go. So the proof of concept, essentially I started not with audio, but with actually a temperature transmitter, just measuring temperature and humidity. And I built a control panel to go in the truck of my car, in the bed of my truck. And basically ran the algorithm to be like, can I compress the temperature signal? And the answer is yes, it works. And I was compressing and I was comparing, to the default algorithm in Ignition, which is what I was using. It's like the SCADA platform. And I was like, man, this is like looking a lot better than what SCADA platform is producing. And it's working, and I have controls. I got the threshold. So I'm like, this is actually working for this. So like, and the code is solid. So like, what if I just put this on Daisy and just like piped audio into it? Like, would it just work? And it did. It literally just worked. And I was like, I'm hearing audio coming out of this. That's crazy. So we're cooking with gas. And as you can see, so this is a spectrogram. So this is like human speech, just like a short clip. As you can see, so this is the input, and this is the same thing on the output after compression. This is after 15 to 1 compression. which in reality is 30-to-1 compression, but the doubling of data. So as you can see, it's almost like all of these little wiggles, all these little things. So like this up here, there's some pretty high frequency information up there that gets like preserved. But all of the areas where there's relative silence or the frequency, it's like a soap film. It like adheres to the spectral content. It's like adaptively lowering the sample rate. And I think it's pretty cool. Okay, so you might be thinking like, yeah, so okay, data compression, that's one thing, but like time stretching, well, what does this have to do with the audio time stretching effect? Essentially, I also wondered that same thing myself at the start, and I was like, well, what can I actually do with this? Because it's like just taking audio and making it sound slightly worse than it did is not like the coolest effect. I think it's kind of cool, but I don't know that's going to fly off the shelves necessarily. So essentially, similar to what I did on the Digitact, I implemented first kind of like the classic like old school algorithm, which is like you have one pointer that keeps track of where you should be, and then you have your actual read pointer, which is moving faster because you're like pitched up or you're pitched down. So there's this inherent distance between them. Normal like old school algorithm measures that distance just in samples, and then you have like that's your grain size. So it's like, oh, it can only get 500 samples away, and then once it's 500 samples away, we start a splice and we move back. That's like good, but it kind of creates that classic like fixed rate robotic old school sounding time stretch, which is cool, but essentially what mine does is we say, well, we have this sparse domain, right? This is kind of this weird esoteric thing where we're like no longer in the uniform sampling zone. When we have a buffer, it's like the samples aren't evenly spaced, everything gets weird, this is a visualization of right here. So this is like a bass note, and then there's a snare hit, right? So the idea is we measure that distance in the sparse domain so that having 15 samples of difference between two pointers means an actual different amount of time depending on how densely spaced your samples are. So like here in the bass note, 15 samples ahead is like, 0.25 seconds or something. But here, 15 samples ahead is like 0.01 seconds. So essentially, that's what's making the grain size like change adaptively. And I guess the point to highlight is that like normally this type of intelligence is obtained with like a Fourier transform, some sort of spectral analysis, autocorrelation, something of that regard, which are it works amazing. That's the basis for like all this type of stuff, but it's also very expensive. And I'm very interested in cheap algorithms for low power microcontrollers. And so how expensive is this? It's free. It's just baked into this sparse format. Like I just say, add up the sum of the indexes of the next 15 samples, and that's my measure. And it just tells me so essentially the sparse domain gives you a lot of advantages, and I think it's pretty cool. So what other advantages can we get? Let's search for them. So we have distortion is another interesting one. So if you think about going back to this real quick, like what does distortion do? Like say like a sine wave folder where you're essentially passing your input through a sine function and then you apply a bunch of gain to it. So what if instead of taking like the black line and just like taking our uniform output and doing that, which it works, but it creates like a ton of aliasing and it sounds horrible because it's like the whole point of distortion is you're generating all these harmonics, but then you're within this digital system, and so those harmonics then alias and it sounds really bad and it's not good. In this case, what we do is we apply the distortion to the control points before you've interpolated. You can do all sorts of crazy wave folding and all this stuff. It doesn't sound quite exactly the same, but there's zero aliasing, and it only just costs the cost of evaluating the sine function, which I have here, but it's also done with lookup tables, which is even cheaper. But so yeah, that's one avenue that I found that's really cool. Another thing, the amplitude envelope. You might have heard of like an envelope follower type module. It's like you want to track the dynamics of, say, your like drum groove that you're putting through it. Well, again, going back to this, it's like we have all the peaks and valleys. That's pretty much is the recipe for generating the amplitude envelope. You just like average the peaks and valleys and track that, and then you just maybe put it through a filter for smoothing, but it's like amplitude envelope, also free. Now we have some interesting clock sources, which is we have the rate that the sparse samples are being generated, which is that non-uniform rate. What if we just use that to tick an LFO? It's like a sine wave, all of a sudden it becomes very interesting because it like oscillates faster when the information's dense, oscillates slower when the information's less dense. So you have an information density LFO. Same thing goes for the splice rate, because it's like once you pitch up or you slow it down, all of a sudden you're splicing very frequently. What if you just drove an LFO with the splice rate? Well, then you have another unique modulation source that all it costs is just a lookup table of a sine wave or a triangle wave or whatever you want to do. And most interesting to me, and also most unexplored, is like frequency estimation, in that this method is very much inspired by like empirical mode decomposition. Does anyone? It's a bit esoteric, but essentially, it's like if you did the extrema thing and you did it iteratively and you just like repeated it upon itself, you kind of like you're doing like an adaptive frequency transform. So one, I think that without doing any of that extra stuff, the spacing between the points is going to tell you something about the frequencies contained within the signal. It might not be like a direct, oh, like there's this spacing, so it means this frequency is here because they're all overlapping each other, but I think there's some use in that. But then if you say like did a wavelet transform or just like filter bank, basically you just isolate it into filter bank and then run this algorithm on each of the banks individually. If we look at like JPEG and MP3 as representatives of like, what do? Well, they put it in a filter bank and they isolate it and then they analyze those individually. So it's like, I think that bodes pretty well for the success of something like that as like a kind of adaptive, non-FFT, cheap embedded frequency transformation. So I wrote a paper on the method that I'm showing you here. I'm hoping that I can, write a paper on that too. So bonus round. What if we just got rid of everything and just used linear interpolation the entire way through? Would the algorithm still work? Yes, it does. It sounds maybe there's like a little more aliasing because your frequency suppression is not as good. But when it comes to, we look at who is our opponent. We have AI models, sparse autoencoders, compressive sensing, statistical craziness, all this stuff. And we have humble linear interpolation. It's very cheap. And so, essentially what I want to do to kind of the outro before we can do like a little Q&A sesh is just swap over. I have the linear interpolation only mode on this one. Again, 2% of the CPU, and this is like $10 CPU. Let's just see what it sounds like. Does anyone have like a song request of what they want to? We can pipe audio through. What do you got?
I have my latest track.
Oh, okay. What is it on Spotify?
You can go to Newgrounds and download.
I think we're gonna have to do something that's on Spotify. I do love that you're a Newgrounds user in 2026. I was on there playing Alien Hominid in 2004.
Then I'm on Spotify. Then the latest song I released on there would be Subtract Hominem.
How do you spell that? Sorry. Tristan.
TRIST.
Oh, with an A. Tristan Tate.
Bay.
Bay.
B-A-Y.
Tristan Bay. Oh my gosh, wait, is this you?
Thankfully.
Let's see, release it, heightened. We can do whatever. Also, I have to reroute this real quick. This is not you. All right, how about you choose a song? It's Subtract Hominem. Okay. Well, I guess maybe it would help if I knew what it sounded like before this, but we actually can swap between them pretty easily. So let's see. Let me just take. This is the setup, so I'm gonna try and not blast everybody's ears here. Oh, whoops. Let's just get this going just for the sake of. So let's just pass through.
That's not.
I know. Give me a second. No, we are gonna play it, but I just needed to test the audio first. might make it sound kind of bad, sorry. This is maybe the first attempt I've made of microtonal music with this algorithm. We can time stretch it though. All right, I'm sorry. I really am enjoying this, but I think, you know, there's some material sounds good going through it and some doesn't. And also we're on like the super cheapo version. So how about this? Lauryn Hill, let's try this. Oh, here we go. Oh, we're clipping, sorry. So again, this is linear interpolation all the way through. Like the time stretching aspect of it works pretty much exactly the same. So I mean, that's, sorry, I was clipping earlier, it sounded kind of bad, but let's see if we can lower the quality. Let's see just what it sounds like. It's weird because it's like, I'm like, why is the quality not going down? But it is. I don't know. I'm confused. Oh, here we go. So this is like the minimum quality. This is like your tape was left out in the sun for days on end. I highly recommend it.
Bounce audio to VHS tape. That's fun too.
You could do like the, what is it, William, the destruction loops where you're like actively destroying the tape every time it plays, you know? You could be like dropping some sort of like sulfuric acid onto it or something, I don't know. Could be cool. But anyway, so the fact that you're hearing real audio come out of that, and it, you know, obviously it's a little bit mixed when you start messing with the settings, but the fact you can slow it down, you can speed it up, you can change the pitch, and that's like just literally every single step linear interpolation, every single step. So it's like, I don't know if you can get cheaper than that. You can definitely get better sounding than that, but you're going to be using an FFT, you're going to be doing autocorrelation, you're going to be doing all that. So yeah, linear interpolation is absolutely goated. So yeah, does anyone have any questions? Anything, any song you request or anything? Yeah, okay, yeah. Sorry, the buffer looped around. Essentially, I have done a little bit with FFT. Oh, that's an excellent point. She asked, have you done a computational comparison between the FFT? And I would say not directly in the sense that I implemented the FFT like using the was it CMSys libraries on the processor and all this. And it was so expensive that I was like, I couldn't like, I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it was more, I was like, I don't even want to mess with that. Essentially, it's so expensive that to do like a kind of bad FFT is going to cost like 80% of your processor or something. You could, you know, you could take all of the same precautions or like, you know, downgrades that people have done where it's like, oh, well, you run it at a lower sample rate or you do like a different block size and all that. So I'm like, I guess I'm not anti-FFT, but I'm like, I kind of am anti-FFT. Yeah, that's kind of my thing, and I'm like, I don't know. I really like time domain algorithms, and so I don't necessarily have any issue with FFT, but I was always like, can't we do something else? And that's kind of that. So that EMD, that paper that I mentioned earlier, that's a similar thing, where yeah, they're just like from the time domain, can't we like get some frequency estimation? So that kind of stuff always just like fascinates me. So yes.
How bad does it sound if instead of interpolating at all, you just hold the samples?
That is so okay. So the question was, can you just do the sample and hold version instead of even linear interpolation? I haven't tried that personally, but honestly, I think you would just get more aliasing. It would just sound like super chip tune, like crunchy robotic. It could be really cool though. That's true. Yeah, honestly,
If you never have to move a speaker, then yeah, it's a lot less.
yeah, I was gonna say that would really be that. I think that would essentially be free on the processor. Like it would just be like, are you sure you want to do this? Like I don't know.
Speakers, if you just push it.
Yeah, I was gonna say you might be breaking some cones with that one. That's
For CV, but
yeah, yeah. So I think for me, as I think linear interpolation is kind of that best of both worlds of like it's like honestly what it can do is incredible. Like when I started again interpolating delay lines, I was like, oh, this like sync interpolation is gonna be so much better for how much more it costs. And then I was like, oh, does sound really good. And then I realized I hadn't actually downloaded it and I was still listening to linear interpolation. And I was like, oh shit, that's pretty good. Yeah, what's up?
is your bit depth like 16-bit for each of the interpolated samples?
Yeah, yes, it is. So the bit depth it is 16, or actually this codec is it's 24 bit, but then it brings it in. I think it is, yeah, essentially 16 bit. And there, yeah, so that actually that's a good point because it brings up one of the caveats, I guess, is that like on here, it's like essentially the algorithm gets you start to suffer a little bit if your full range signal is not really utilizing the full bit depth of your analog digital converter. Then you're essentially doing the whole algorithm, but with less bit depth to work with. So it's like you want to make sure you're like saturating the converter, relatively speaking. You don't have to like blow the speaker out or anything, but it definitely that was kind of like in my first initial tests. It was very much like I was like, why isn't it working? Or like, why does it sound so bad? And then I realized I was like utilizing like this much of the range, and once I expanded it, then that's when it started sounding good. So good looking out there. Anyone have any other questions? Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, on the initial demo, you were kind of making granular sample type stuff, but this is just like an encoding style, so it's not necessarily granular. Is there like kind of an effect or something? I mean, this is just like a different representation for.
So this is where it gets a little weird, and this is why I had trouble like writing the paper or like trying to keep the scope in. Is essentially it's like the data compression, like the encoding and decoding, isn't the granular thing. But like I was saying in the talk, the granular, like the encoding and decoding is what enables me to do the kind of like intelligent, like adaptive grain size stuff. So it's like essentially without the time stretch stuff, I would just have like a sample player. But then because I'm like, oh, I can do this adaptive distance in the sparse domain and measure and make it so the grain size changes like automatically, determining like a snare hit has a really small grain, bass note has a really big grain. That's kind of how it's connected. If that does that answer your question? Sorry, I got a little.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused because I actually know a little bit about granular sampling,
Mm-hmm.
like even grains for pitch stretching and stuff.
Yeah.
Yours is just kind of flipped on a different.
Yeah, it's weird because I know I keep saying sparse domain like that's just gonna make it make sense, but it's the fact that you're like abandoning the uniform sample grid and going to this like where the samples are non-uniformly spaced. That's like what's informing the granularness of it. But at the end of the day, you still are just doing kind of like a time domain granular thing.
So when you are reconstructing this, how many points are you looking at on either side of a given point, or does it pretty much?
It really only requires like two points. So it's like
Not even like 3 points?
no, well that's the thing because like so if the cubic Hermite splines normally it does require 4 points. But this was one of the things in the paper that I realized was that the kind of points on the end, because like linear interpolation, you just need 2 points, right? It's like, and you just draw a line between them. Normally for the higher order methods, you need like at least 4, or like sync interpolation, you can spread it out, you can make it wider. But for this one, what I realized is that those other 2 points are meant to estimate the derivative like the, where is it going? They're meant to estimate the derivative. But then I realized when you're sampling extrema, the extrema inherently have a derivative of 0. So when I I was doing it with 4 points, and then I inspected the code, and those terms were basically zeroing out. And then I just realized, yeah, I could just optimize them out. And so you only need 2.
What are you saving for 1 point? I mean, is it like a tuple? Like, I saw you had like a.
Yeah. Essentially, it's a tuple. So it's like a value index pair.
And it's indexed to the original time, like before you go forward?
So you do like a FIFO, where you imagine it's like okay, this sample was at 0.5 amplitude, and that was in the original buffer sample index 1032, and that's like the point that you save. Yeah, and also another part of the nuance that's different between the two modules, the linear or only version, is like you can either do like subsample precision, where you're like, here the extrema actually landed halfway, or a third of the way between them, and then but then you have the disadvantage of you having to store like a floating point number or store more information as your index. Whereas again, I was surprised that it worked as well as it did, but also just kind of cheating it and just being like, it's close enough, and just saving as an integer, it also just works. But you do get more aliasing. So it wasn't until I started like blasting it with like sine wave sweeps that I was really finding some of where it started to break down. But then in reality, we're never, well, I don't know, maybe some people, but I'm never really blasting sine sweeps up to 20,000 hertz or whatever in my music. So, but yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Have you run it on any other microcontrollers other than the Nielsen?
No, not at this point. Everyone that has been following this whole process for me developing this is like, you got to make a plugin, man. Just put it in the VST, and I'm like, yeah, I guess, but like, what's the point, man? What's the point? I was like, yeah, but okay, actually, never mind. I have done it I did it on a Arduino, or sorry, yeah, the M0. So this was like M7, the M0, which is like the lowest spec one. But that was not processing audio. That's what I was processing, the like temperature transmitter signals. Those are running at like, essentially there was like infinite headroom because you're sampling the temperature like once per minute or something. So, but I think it might be kind of demanding. The full time stretch thing might be kind of demanding on like a lower tier processor, but I feel like it would work. I'm curious to try more. That was kind of the biggest response I got, because I made a video like kind of documenting some of this. And it was like, and I put my email on it, and it was just like every person from every individual, like the champion of every audio platform, emailed me and was like, I want this now. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out something right now of like open source of like that linear only version. Can I just open source that? Because I have like, I don't want to be the patent guy and all that, but it's like, I'm not trying, it's like, so anyway, I'm filing a patent, or trying to file a patent on the core idea, or I have the provisional patent and all that. But then I also am like, I really like open source, and I think the core idea is like, it's so almost like fundamental in a way that like, yeah, that's essentially, I think the linear only version, I can just like put that out in the wild and just be like, hey, copy left, you can, if you use this, open source your stuff and go wild. So that's kind of my hope. Yeah. Unless there's any other, oh, okay, yeah, what's up? I was really tempted to bring my Mutable Instruments beads with me and just slam a bunch of reverb on there, but I was I guess it does sound amazing with reverb, but I didn't want to use it as a crutch for this demo necessarily. But I highly, yeah, it's fun.
Can you think there's an algorithm you can use to actually implement?
Oh, okay, so like this sparse delay line idea. I honestly, I think you could find a way to do it. I just haven't like actually designed enough reverbs to know. I know there's like feedback matrices and stuff, but that's a little. I would like to try that. I really would.
I know granular reverb is a thing. I don't know.
That's a good point, because like one thing that this module right now and this current kind of like beta firmware doesn't have is like, there's not like a mix and there's not like a feedback mechanism. But I think that by implementing that and then putting maybe just like some sort of diffusion, like simple, like all pass diffusion network or something on it, that would kind of lead to, you could get like that classic, like when it's in pitched up mode, you get that like shimmer reverb kind of effect. So the feedback is definitely something I want to start messing with. And this firmware is definitely going to evolve a lot before the module actually comes out. But yeah, that's a good idea. So yeah, lots of directions to go with it, and I'm excited to explore those directions. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the talk, and thank you all for being here.